Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you might be joining from. I am HR Funk, and this is my firing line. This is the show that is completely driven, usually, by you, your questions, and your comments. But if you saw the announcement video earlier today, you know that this is a special show this evening. In just a little while, I'm going to be joined by Dr. Andrew Barry, and we're going to be talking about a very serious topic this evening. Usually, it's the zany, comedic banter that we have on here, but this is going to be a little bit more of an important subject that we're going to be dealing with. Specifically, Dr. Barry is a specialist in post-traumatic stress disorder, particularly for military veterans, law enforcement officers, firefighters, and other first responders, and people who, as I said in the video earlier today, deal with traumatic incidents as part of their job. So we're going to bring him in just a little bit. But before we get to that, I have a couple of announcements to make, beginning with tomorrow's video. We've got the regular Wednesday premiere video tomorrow that will have the live chat going along with it. So if you can, be sure to tune in at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time for that video. That's going to be a good one. They're all good ones. So if you missed any of the ones in the past, be sure to go back and check those out. Also, I wanted to get this out next week on Monday for Veterans Day. I'm once again going to be at Hop Armament in Hayesville, Ohio. And if you didn't get a chance to make it last year, this is your chance to do it again this year. And if you did make it last year, come on back. I'm going to be there from hopefully about 10 o'clock in the morning until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And if you go to hopmunitions.com, you'll be able to get the information for their address and the times, their business hours and all that. They're going to be open a lot longer than that. They open, I think, 9 in the morning, and they're open till 5 or 6 or 7 at night or something like that. But I should be there from about 10 till about 2. So if you are anywhere in the area and you can stop by, definitely be sure to do that. I'm planning on taking some firearms again this year that you've seen in the videos over the course of the last several months. So if you want to see any of those, they'll be on display there. And I can't wait to see some of you and have a chance to chat. So looking forward to that. And speaking of Veterans Day, that's a good segue into this topic for this evening. Um, it's a tragedy that, due to the fact that a lot of people deal with the or uh, are suffering from the after effects of the situations they've dealt with as part of their jobs, keeping other people safe. That when we get to this time of year, sometimes there's a difficulty associated with that. And I was thinking about this actually over the course of the last several days and looking forward to trying to bring Dr. Barry on. And we've tried to do this several times over the last few weeks, and it seems like our schedules just never worked out quite right. Finally, I was able to get a hold of him yesterday, and it looked like things were going to work out well. So I'm going to be bringing him on soon. Just to give you a little bit of a history with he and I, um, he actually contacted me a couple of months ago after seeing one of the videos that I produced where I was talking about a situation that I was dealing with back when I was still a police officer. And he asked me if I would come on his show. And I felt a little odd about that because I thought, it seems like this situation I talked about wasn't nearly as significant as some of the things that other people have dealt with in the course of their law enforcement career or military career or what have you. But he encouraged me to come on with the idea that every time somebody opens up about the things they've dealt with, it gives other people permission to do the same thing. So people that might be living with the after effects of some of these more severe circumstances might hear me tell my story, and it makes it a little bit easier for them to come on later and tell their story. So I did appear as a guest. It was a great time. There was Dr. Barry. We also had a couple of his associates, one of whom is, I think, going to be with us tonight. I'm not sure if he's going to be joining by video or if we're just going to get voice input, but that's going to be Nate, who is a former Marine. So hopefully we'll get him on as well. But without further ado, I'm going to bring Dr. Barry into the room. And there he is right there. How you doing, Doc?
Hey, folks. Thanks for having me on, Howard. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. I appreciate you coming on as a guest. We've got 22 people in here right now, and I'm sure that number is going to climb. And if you would be so kind as to give everybody a little bit of an idea of your background and what it is exactly you're trying to do with the presentations that you're making, and let me get your YouTube channel up on the screen here, and that is Two Docs and a Grunt. For anyone on YouTube, you'll be able to go to that YouTube channel and see Doc Barry along with his two associates and hear some of the other stories from people who have been on the show prior to when I was on there. Anyway, I'm sorry, I've been blabbing. The floor is yours to let everyone know something about you and what it is your work entails.
Sure. Well, anyway, yeah. I'm Andrew Barry, which nobody will remember. Just call me Doc. Um, it's a nickname I treasure, by the way. The Marines and the Corpsmen started calling me that years ago when I was on a website, and I never really initially knew what to make of it. So I asked a retired gunnery sergeant I knew what did it mean when they start calling you Doc? I seriously didn't know, and he said they're calling you that, and I said yeah. He said that means that it's a title of respect, reverence. That means they feel safe around you. And that also means they think of you as one of them, and there's no higher praise. And I'm like, well, I've come to treasure my nickname more than my given name. And of course, my parents are getting pissed off about that. They're rotating in their funeral urns right now, even as we speak. I have an odd sense of humor, by the way. But then again, considering the patient population I work with, it's no wonder I'm just as crazy as the rest of you guys. Um, and I specialize, I am a psychologist and psychoanalyst, and I specialize in working with veterans and first responders fighting with the gift that keeps on giving. And no, I'm not talking about VD. I am talking about post traumatic stress disorder. And what I try to do is to take the mystery out of it, take the fear out of it, to normalize it, etc. Um, I have a very brief tour in the military. I do have an honorable discharge from the Marine Corps. I did not, let's make that clear. I did not see combat. I'm not a corpsman. All I have is an honorable discharge. And it's always rather interesting when the combat guys start telling me exactly what goes on over there. And I say that it's interesting because normally they only share that with those who have been there. But for whatever reason, they feel safe enough to share it with me. And no, it's no higher praise. And they feel close to me. And it's, like I say, I don't understand, but I'm grateful. And I'm grateful to be whatever help to these guys that I can be. So anyway, upwards of 20 years ago, I met a guy by the name of Nate Emory, who is trying to get on with us right now. He's got technical difficulties. He's a retired Marine Mustang, started enlisted, became an officer, fought in two separate campaigns, Desert Storm and Mogadishu, Somalia. And he and I started presenting a paper at analytic institutes, national and international conferences around the country. We've done this twice out in Los Angeles, once in Chicago, twice in Boston, several times in New York, DC, Virginia. We've done it as a webinar, and it's been very, very well received. Now, the significance of it is normally if you do an analytic presentation, you normally have another psychoanalyst as your discussant. In other words, I read my paper, my psychoanalyst colleague opens up, rips off it, what they like, what they don't like, and then the floor is opened up to the audience for questions. Now, as anybody who knows me will tell you, I can never do anything the right way or the normal way. I got to do it my way. And I thought, since this is a paper for and about veterans, why on God's green earth am I going to have an analyst in my discussion? Why not have a veteran? So there was only one choice, and that was Nate. And I called him up, and he said, "Where and when do you want me?" He did it on a lark. And between 2016, when we did it the first time, and now, we've done this together probably 21 times. all over the place. And it's kind of gotten a life of its own. And along the way, we were fortunate, so fortunate to meet up with a newly retired Navy corpsman who spent 22 years in 9 deployments, and his name is Luis Fonseca. And the name may not register with some folks who are listening right now. Luis Fonseca is a Navy Cross recipient, and he is the most decorated Navy corpsman alive today. Um, he is very open about his own mental health struggles, and so the three of us had a sit down one day on visual like this on video, and we said, "Hey, you want to try this?" And they said, "Okay." We initially started with the name Three Guys Talking, and then I came up with Two Docs and a Grunt because it has that vaudeville catchiness about it. I'm kidding, and it's taken off. On Two Docs and a Grunt, we have had 9/11 responders, cops, firefighters, combat veterans, dispatchers, corrections officers, and it's free flowing discussions about mental health that go anywhere. And it's the motif that Louise had on a few of the videos are a bunch of Adirondack chairs around a campfire, and that's just what it's like. And what we found is after the first couple of minutes of initial nervousness, the ideas and the questions start to flow. And hopefully Howard can attest to this, we try to make everybody feel pretty comfortable. And I think it's all three of us have magnificent beards that may have something to do with it. But we're very good listeners. There's no judgment around here, for God's sakes. And the discussions often get very raw, and sometimes guys are in tears. And that would include a retired two-star general who was choking up with us on screen. And afterward, when I checked in on him the next day, like I always do, and he said, "I'm fine, Doc. I'm so glad I did it. It's like I've known you guys for years." And that's the effect we seem to have on people, which certainly makes these discussions flow much more easily. So I thought it would be helpful to tell a story. I'm a storyteller. I don't use DSM jargon or psychobabble because storytelling brings post-traumatic stress to life so much more effectively, I think. So I'm going to tell you a story about PTSD. I started my career as a diagnostician in a state-run supermax umpty ump years ago, and uh, it was my job at that time to read an inmate's rap sheet, interview him for an hour or so, read testing, and then type up a report, suggest programs, and send him on his way, which has nothing whatsoever to do with psychotherapy and has everything whatsoever to do with fast food, McDonald's level classification, send them on their way. This one guy came in. He was a Vietnam vet, and I looked at his charges, and it was all alcohol related, DWI, public drunkenness, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Essentially, this guy drank his way out of his own life. And as I was talking with him, he'd been married 2, if not 3 times. His wives all hated him. His kids wouldn't speak to him anymore. Now, when I talk with the combat guys, I will often ask them, who do you miss the most? And what they'll do is they'll tell me about their best friend, their brother, God forbid, their sister on the battlefield, cut in half by machine gun fire, blown up, or killed otherwise. And I even found out about the pink mist uh, through some of these folks. And if anybody who's listening doesn't know what the pink mist is, it's what happens to blood when it's vaporized under gunfire. All of a sudden, you see before you a pink mist. And then when that goes away, that's when you see the bodies and body parts. So I asked this guy my question: who do you miss the most? What this guy gave me on that day was a priceless gift. He gave it to me, and now I would like to give it to all of you. His response was, and I quote, the color was surging to his face. The tears were streaming down his cheeks. He bursts into tears and he half shouts, Doc, says, I miss me. I used to be a nice guy. Now, let me say that again to make sure that it registers with everybody who's listening. I miss me. I used to be a nice guy. Which told me, that simple sentence, I'm still unpacking the layers of it. And it told me that this poor bastard went into the service as person A, and he came out the other side of his service as person B. He had no idea who he even was anymore. He had no idea what mattered. And what a lot of people don't know about post traumatic stress is when a person has been traumatized past a certain point, and in this case, we're talking about combat, incredible deafening noise, adrenaline blasts, non existent sleep, dreadful food, god awful weather conditions. It all comes together in a very powerful package that changes the central nervous system. In plainer English than that, the biochemistry and the physiology of the brain changes. This guy had I would wager to say, to suggest, he had a different brain at the end of his service than he had at the beginning. Now, what was I saying a couple of minutes ago about I miss me? I used to be a nice guy. If the brain chemistry and physiology change rings true here, and I think it does, is it any wonder he had no idea who he was anymore because of that change in his brain and all the experiences that he had with it? Post traumatic stress goes miles beyond nightmares, anxiety, depression, anger, perseveration, concentration difficulties, hypervigilance. The brain changes. This is not the same person who comes home as the person who went in. It's not a personality disorder. The way I think of it is it's a shift of personality. And that encounter resonates with me to this day. I think of him often, and by now he's probably dead, buried, and gone by his own hand. Now, my approach, my belief in my core about post traumatic stress comes from a TV show some of you may remember called MASH. Uh, and one of the episodes they talk about triage. MASH, by the way, stands for Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. It was set during the Korean War about the trauma surgeons who were patching GIs back up and either sending them home or sending them to the front again. And the character Hawkeye Pierce was huge on me. If there wasn't a Hawkeye Pierce, there wouldn't have been a Doc Barry. That's how much that character meant to me. I loved his intensity, the dedication to his patients, the fact that he was an absolute maverick, the fact that he had real problems with abusive or incompetent authority figures. He was the big brother, uncle, and dad we all wish we could have had when we were kids growing up in the 70s. Hawkeye said in an episode one day with Triage, said, the guy who's bleeding the most buckets gets seen first. That's triage in a physical sense. Now, in a psychological sense, I think those who have been most traumatized need to be seen by us clinicians first. All right. It's the least we can do for these men and women who keep the nation safe as veterans and or keep our community safe as first responders. This is what we must be achieving here. And
Doc, I don't
I,
want to interrupt you
yeah,
here, but it looks
go
like
ahead. I
Nate
could
is
do this
back.
all day.
No,
Huh?
it looks like Nate is back, so I want to try to bring him into the room here.
Okay, folks. Okay.
Hopefully, the connection is going to be better now. And there he is. Welcome back, Nate.
Hey,
Hey, sorry about that. Windows Defender decided it was a good time to scan my computer.
and
Well,
it left you defenseless.
yeah, it seems like it's working a lot better now. So,
Yeah.
everyone, this is Nate. This is who Doc was talking about a little while ago that he's been doing the presentations with for quite some time. So, we were fortunate to have him with us as well. And Nate, I want to give you just a chance to let everyone know something about yourself. here at the beginning, and then we'll kind of get back into there. We'll leave Doc with a cliffhanger there, and we'll come back to him in just a couple of minutes.
Yeah. So Nate Emory, I did 22 years in the Marine Corps. I was 12 enlisted and 10 as an officer, and did combat tours in Desert Storm and the infantry, and again in Mogadishu, Somalia. And then I was a DoD contractor for 3 years, and then served as a government civilian for the Secretary of the Navy for 8 years. And that's about it.
Well, thanks again for joining, Nate. I really appreciate you being here. Doc, I have a question that's come up from one of the viewers, and this is one of my regulars, Rabbi, who's asking, how do you identify and triage the people that you were talking about, the people that are bleeding the most buckets of blood?
Well, and that is speaking metaphorically, those who have been most traumatized. There's no way to prioritize. They just come to me. I'll do the best I can, Rabbi, to answer your question. They just come to me and they start talking. And I am a believer in, and okay, I don't get too fancy schmancy with my approach to working with veterans and first responders. I'll tell you what my approach is, and this I didn't think this up. This is I'm not smart enough for this. It's way above my pay grade. It goes like this. You open your mouth and the pain comes out. That's the secret of the universe right there. You open your mouth and the pain comes out. Now, the significance also of this, of how it all starts, is we as veterans and first responders have been trained to not talk about it. We have been trained to think of everybody else around us absolutely first and ourselves absolutely last. We are trained not to think about ourselves at all because of the stigma of asking for help. Okay. And we don't want to be that guy who's viewed as the weak link in the chain. We would rather see to the people around us. And it's a very hard defense, a very hard wall to break through. And I'm here to tell you, when a guy picks up the phone and calls somebody like me and says, I've got a problem, listen to me, to whoever's listening to this. That is the hardest goddamn thing he has ever done in his life, or she. And when they come see me, or the first phone conversation I have with them, I honor what that took. I verbalize, I appreciate them for finally having the strength to say that they just can't do this by themselves anymore. And I tell them that as we talk about this stuff that you're going to find so hard to talk about, what eventually is going to happen is all of that pressure, all of that agony, all of that stress will start to, as I said, you open your mouth and the pain comes out. All those thoughts get verbalized. Because when you're feeling feelings or thinking about feelings or thinking about or remembering trauma, it's an entirely different experience from putting it into words. Because when you put it into words, it becomes all the more real. It really happened. And I cannot tell you how many times guys have come to me thinking that somehow speaking about their agony is going to somehow make the situation worse. And at the end of it, which can go on for 1, 2, 3, 4 hours or even more, I'll ask them, how do you feel now? And it stops them in their tracks. And it's like it never occurred to them. They pause a moment and say, Doc, I actually feel relieved. And I'm like, my friend, my brother, welcome to your life. Welcome to your healing. I hope that sort of answers your question, Rabbi.
Doc, is there anything that you can think of that would help somebody get to that moment where they are making that phone call or they are
Yes.
reaching out to ask for that assistance,
Mm-hmm.
to sort of help get them over that hump to where they might
Okay.
be able to get some assistance?
All right. Yes. And Nate's heard me say this 100 times before. That's why he's falling asleep right now. No, I say to anybody who's on the verge of making that call, sir or ma'am, you are acting perfectly normally. You are reacting perfectly normally to an unbelievably abnormal set of circumstances, be it coming from combat, disastrous medical calls, fires that burn down houses and kill people, etc., etc. You're reacting perfectly normally to an unbelievably abnormal set of circumstances, whatever they may be. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, sir, ma'am, you are not crazy. You are not weak. You're just in pain.
And when I think about that, and I think about my own reluctance when you first contacted me about coming onto your show, and I I think my perspective was a little bit different. I wasn't looking at it so much as, I guess, not wanting to reach out for help as much as just I didn't think what I had to talk about was really in the same league as so many people that have dealt with so many more traumatic things. And I know you sort of talked me into that over the course of 2 or 3 conversations, and I was glad that you did. I enjoyed coming on. I thought that was a positive way to use some of those experiences that were very negative at the time they occurred. So I hope that anyone out there who is listening or watching, and they're right there at that point where they're thinking, I really do want to try to get some assistance with this, try to reach out and look for a way to try to deal with these circumstances that I found myself in through no fault of my own. And if you are in that position, by all means do so. And is there a a good first person to reach out to? Is it better to reach out to a professional such as yourself? Is it better to turn to a friend or a family member? Is there really no difference as far as who they talk to, as long as they start talking? How would you approach that?
I have an answer for that, but Nate is sitting in stony silence, so I'm going to let him go first.
Well, I just can't say this is a professional opinion, but it's what I did. Um, I didn't talk about it for 18 years. My first wife didn't know anything. Second wife didn't know anything. They just kind of knew I was in the infantry and I did some stuff, and I never talked to them about it. And I didn't talk to any of the Marines that I was there with either. I think that's a relatively new kind of change where people in combat are a lot better at talking to each other about it, even like immediately afterwards. So I'd stuffed it all down for 18 years. And by that time, for me, it had grown into something else. It was growing into anxiety, hypervigilance, anger, you know, um, inappropriate coping mechanisms, drinking. And so when I got to the point where, I was critical, I didn't know what was going on. So for me, I had to reach out for a professional because I was actually, scared of myself. And so that's what I had to do. But I think that if they feel like they'd be more comfortable talking to another veteran or somebody they trust first, I can't imagine how that would be a bad thing. As long as, if something comes up that, somebody's making plans or they're a danger to themselves, then somebody needs to be reaching out for some professional help. But I agree with Doc Barry is when you start talking about it, even you don't even have to talk about it directly. You can just kind of talk around it and talk about the deployment or whatever. And the weight starts to come off. You start spread loading that weight from you onto that other person. And I know it doesn't make sense, just saying it if you've never done it. But if you talk to anybody who's been into group therapy or individual therapy, they'll tell you that the first time they walked out, they felt different right away. And I'd encourage people to say something to somebody, and maybe even just if you can just find a group that you can get into. And I recently joined a support group out here in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and I didn't know what I was going to get out of it. I just sat there and listened, and most of the guys that are there, and the women there, they're Vietnam vets. We had a couple Korea vets, and I just even just listening to them and being around them, knowing that they've been through some of the same stuff, that takes some of the burden off. So do something. Just don't keep doing what you've been doing.
Mhm.
And let me approach this from a little bit different angle. If you are that friend or you are that family member, and you have someone you care about, and you feel that they're struggling, you think that they're having some difficulty with some of the things that they dealt with, is there a way to approach them and help encourage them to take that step where they're asking for help, or trying to avail themselves of some of the services that are out there? And
Let
that's to
me
either
let
one of
me
you.
yeah, let me jump in on that one. I've said, and I think you may have heard me say this in the recordings that I've sent to you. Um, I get this question all the time. People will come up to me after hearing me talk about PTSD for over an hour, and they'll say to me, "Doc, I never know what to do. I never know what to say." And I'll say to them, "Okay, check it out, man. Chances are the person who's coming to you already knows what your skill set is, right? So you don't have to do much of anything. And as far as what to say, well, guess what? Part two, you don't really have to say much of anything. All you have to do is listen. Now, I'm going to be doing what I do best. I'm going to be looking right in the camera, making steady eye contact, and just listen. And I'm going to turn my goddamn phone over and off. And the rest of the world in the universe doesn't matter. All that matters right now is you and me. I want you to tell me how it hurts, why it hurts, where it hurts. I will not judge you. I will be emotionally present and here for you. I will listen to you. I might ask at some point, how can I be of most help to you right now? Or do you need me to just sit here and listen and be with you? And that right there, my friends, that's usually enough right there. People have no idea the sheer power of listening, the gift of just listening and being a rock steady presence, witnessing the agony of the other person. And that's where it starts. It starts with a conversation. The healing process that takes place after that is very individualized. One size does not fit all. All we can do is guide our people through their own creative process toward healing, being it horseback riding, needlepoint, cooking, artwork, riding motorcycles, whatever. But the initial step, which is what we're trying to facilitate here, is a conversation. And you're absolutely right. Disclosure breeds disclosure. Howard, when you came on and told your story, and by the way, you never compare traumas. Okay. Yeah, I've been through worse and better and so on and so forth. Okay, fine. If it hurts, talk about it. Do something different and open your mouth and say something. And I was so grateful that you did on that one video that I saw, because that means people who served under you will say, "Ooh, the chief admitted he was hurting. Now maybe that frees up a path for me to admit the same thing." And all of a sudden the playing field gets very level. And then we can actually have a meaningful conversation that everybody gets in on. And that's what we try to do in Two Docs and a Grunt. And that's what I'm hoping we are trying to do tonight with this live cast.
Um, Nate, I don't want to put you on a spot here, and you are under no obligation to answer this question whatsoever. But um, if you're comfortable, would you explain what it was that brought you to the point where you were able to get over that hump and ask for some assistance with some of the things that you were working through.
Yeah, certainly. Even if I didn't want to, I still would, because I think it helps other people see, what comes out of it. What happened was, I had at the time, I think I had 12 kids at the house. My ex wife and I were raising 12 kids, and I was kind of at the top of my career, and but stuff wasn't right with me, and I was just increasingly angry all the time, and pulling back from the family. But what kind of did it was I realized that I was spending a lot of time thinking about a particular bridge in our area, and kind of came to the realization that I was making plans on how I would eventually drive off of this bridge into the river, and it's probably at least 100-foot drop. And when I came to that realization, it just scared me, because uh, people will tell you that sometimes with PTSD and trauma, it's not the person refusing to let go of the trauma; it's the trauma refusing to let go of you. And all that time I'd been having these thoughts and just pushing them aside until I realized that it was having an effect on me, and it scared me bad enough that when I got into work that morning, I immediately stopped and started making phone calls to try to get an appointment to get in and get some help. Now, this was back in 2009, and it took a couple of months before I could finally see somebody. But that's what did it for me. It wasn't anybody else noticing specifically that I was, dealing with PTSD, and even when I went in for that first appointment, I went in there telling them I was there for anger management problems, and the psychiatrist that was doing the intake, I don't know what it was. She's just good at what she did. She just started asking me the right questions, and it wasn't asking me about anger management stuff. She was taking me through the PTSD screening questionnaire, and she was looking right at me. And there's something that happens when another person's actually paying attention to you. They're looking right at you. They're now I realize it's another human being witnessing the pain that you've been through when you tell them. And so I answered questions that I normally would have kind of danced around, and I came apart in her office that day, and that was the beginning of this long, with 15 years now I've been working with this. But yeah, it wasn't. I wish I could say that it was I noticed something right away and went and took care of it, or that somebody intervened for me early and did something. But in my situation, I think I did a pretty good job at trying to ignore it and run away from it, because one of the issues is comparison, right? And all the men in my family, my father's generation, had all been in the Vietnam War, and it was comparing a great uncle who had been in Korea. My grandfather was in World War II, and you always feel like everybody else has it worse than you, and which is a horrible mistake, like Doc Barry said a couple of times, because if that was the litmus by which we decide on whether we can talk about our trauma, there'd only be one person who was really qualified to talk about trauma, right? Everybody else would have a lesser trauma. But yeah, that was the circuitous route where I got to finally asking for help to get something done, and I had no idea that I would ever get beyond just talking to somebody in their office. No idea that we'd start going around with Doc Barry talking to other people about it, let alone a webcast. Yeah, hope that answers your question.
No, it did, and it's a great answer. Um, Doc, I'm going to come back to you for a minute. You have part of your presentation that always resonates with me. That I think you sort of generally title the old chief. And being an old chief, whenever I hear you say go through that explanation, it always catches my attention because it is so spot on for law enforcement officers of my generation and the generations before me, where um, you were not supposed to let anything bother you. You were not supposed to let anything inside that invisible suit of armor that you were supposed to be wearing. And when you go through that metaphor with the old chief, and you get to the point where you're talking about him being at the cemetery and not showing any emotion and all that type of thing, uh, it's I guess it tends to explain some of what we've seen, particularly in the law enforcement community, with the alcoholism, with the failed relationships, with all those types of things. Are I know that it's a long presentation when you do it. Are you able to do like the Reader's Digest version of that for anybody that might be watching right now? And if not, that's okay because I know that you have an entire presentation you do on that.
It started it. I was starting to talk about it at the beginning of it. Um, and then we had then Nate came in after that. I was in the middle of it. But I didn't want to go on and on and on and on. Um, why don't we do it this way? Because we have what 20 minutes left. You only do this for an hour, right, Howard?
I can go a little over an hour,
What
and
does
if it's too long, then we'll save it, and everyone can go to your website and actually watch it
all
there.
right. Well, why don't we do it then? Why does that answer not surprise me? Because once you get a nice group of people, we can do this for hours and whatnot. Does anybody in the studio audience have any questions that I can just
Let's
jump on immediately?
look down through. There's a lot of comments that are coming in, but a lot of people are basically listening to what is being said and just making comments along those lines. Uh, I will throw that out to anyone who is listening right now. If you have questions for either Nate or for Doc Barry, get those up here and I will present them and you can get a direct answer. I know obviously with the two docs and a grunt that's a avenue that someone can go through if they want to try to contact you or communicate with you. If there's somebody out there that just needs something a little bit more quickly, is there a better route to go? I know there are services out there for veterans for mental health
All right.
counseling and all that. Go ahead.
Yeah, I am my practice is full. Plus I can't see anybody out of state because it's a violation of municipal law. Boo-hoo. Um, but what I can suggest is for anybody who wants to be seen, check around in your local veteran community, such as go to your local DAV, Disabled American Veterans, post. Find out who they might recommend if there's anybody with a good reputation in the area for psychotherapy, or American Legion, or any of the other veterans organizations. Find out who's doing it in your hometown. That's the first thing that I would do. The second thing I would do is just subscribe to Two Docs and a Grunt and listen to the variety of discussions that we've had. You'll learn a lot there. Um, and as far as post-traumatic stress, just try to remember one thing: what we are trying to do. And isn't it interesting, by the way? You said we had when we started this, we had 22 members in the studio audience. Hmm, 22 a day. Maybe somebody's trying to tell us something, right? Um, in order for those numbers to go down to zero, discussions, we have to facilitate conversations for those numbers to go down. If we want these guys to stop killing themselves, we have to open the door for them to feel free to talk without fear of judgment, shaming, etc., etc. And getting back to what you were saying, Howard, a few minutes ago, the quote unquote old generation where you're supposed to maintain your suit of armor, not talk about it, be strong, whatever, whatnot. Do you realize that is tantamount to the profession of law enforcement or firefighting or any of the others to dehumanize yourself?
When you put it in those terms, I think yes, I can see that's pretty much exactly what it is.
You betcha. And Nate, Luis, and myself are in the business of saying, no, we need to rehumanize ourselves. Period. End of story. Otherwise, the bodies are going to continue to stack up I am so over that. I am so done with that. Well, you're just a few years behind me, Howard. You and I, especially, we remember when the country was being run by the World War II guys, our fathers, our grandfathers. They had survived the Depression, then World War II, the greatest generation. And those guys were like monolithic. It seemed as though they would just go on forever and ever and ever. Well, that's not the case anymore. And we're the ones who have taken over. And from that generation, World War II guys, I swear to you, now I don't know what the numbers are. I really don't. But I can't really seem to recall hearing about too many World War II guys committing suicide. And you guys,
Well, I've thought about that actually as we were coming up to the show today. I thought, is there something different nowadays as opposed to back then that makes us more susceptible to the PTSD, the suicide? I can remember dealing with, and this was earlier in my law enforcement career, dealing with veterans, not necessarily World War II, but Korean War era veterans, some Vietnam era veterans, um, who were having difficulty. In fact, I can remember being a military policeman in the Marine Corps dealing with Vietnam veterans who at that time were staff NCOs and even some officers who had problems with alcohol and one thing and another. But it does seem to be more pervasive now than it was back in those days. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's a societal thing. I don't know if it's a generational thing. I really don't have an answer for that.
I've got a theory that I can back up with a little bit of data on that. Um, I think what happens with every generation is we look at the next generation and criticize them heavily, and it's easier to look at them and say you don't stack up, you're not as hard as we are, you're a much softer generation, and but when we look back, PTSD has been around since the Iliad, right? Even the Romans would conquer cities, and when they conquered those cities, their veterans would stay there and live in those cities and stay with the guys that they fought with, because it was the best way for them to be able to get back into society. And I think what's kind of happened is the stigma that used to be tied to PTSD and shell shock caused people to keep it quiet so nobody heard about it. And drinking was a lot more acceptable. And I think we weren't reporting things like that because you didn't want to put stigmas on families. There were so many family secrets. Everybody would talk about the uncle or the aunt or whatever that was a shame to the family, but nobody would get into details about it. And I think what was happening is we had a lot of World War II vets, I believe, that were dying, and it appeared that they were dying from over drinking, or they would leave their families, and you'd hear about that part of it, but you wouldn't hear about why they left their families because they didn't tell their families about the war. And when you look in the data about the 22 veterans a day, first of all, the data for the 22 veterans a day comes only from the states who collect that information and chose to share it for that research project. On top of that, when you look at that data and you get in deeper, it looks like about 65 to 70% of the 22 a day that are killing themselves are Vietnam veterans. So this idea that the Vietnam veterans were dealing with it better, and the follow-on generations are the ones that are having such a hard time, and they're the ones killing themselves, or we're the ones killing ourselves, is partly true, but it's because the Vietnam vets are not running around talking about it. They're killing themselves kind of silently, and it's not making it to the news about what we did with Vietnam veterans. So nobody wants to point that out, I believe.
Well, I appreciate that, and thank you for that answer, because that makes as much sense as anything I've ever heard about that. It I guess could be more of a perception that we had of the World War II veterans and the preceding generations of veterans. But you're right; it could just be that, a perception, whereas reality was just something different.
For what it's worth, speaking of the World War II veterans, I'm guessing, I'm hoping, at least some of you out there have heard the name Audie Murphy before. And if anybody doesn't know who Audie Murphy was, he is the most decorated soldier of World War II. When you see that man in his full regalia with all the ribbons and whatnot, he doesn't look like a soldier. He looks like a Christmas tree. If there was a decoration out there, that man received it. That is what he is known for, as well as coming home and writing the book To Hell and Back, and directing the movie, or directing and starring in the movie about his life and so on. So that's what everybody knows. But what a lot of people don't know is he came back from God knows how many years of fighting, and he knew something was horribly wrong when he would sleep with a loaded 45 under his pillow. When he couldn't sleep with his wife anymore because he was beating the daylights out of her every time she'd rolled over. He's in a German foxhole someplace and he's on the verge of being attacked, etc. He was symptomatic as the day is long, and he was petitioning the government to look into this because he knew good and goddamn well he wasn't the only one suffering. But that's a part of his career that a lot of people never even heard about. And I respect the hell out of him for having the stones to do that. He was the apotheosis of a World War II vet who was into the idea of talking about it, at least as best he could at the time, and advocating. And I wish he was around today to continue to advocate.
And that is amazing because you're right. That's part of his story that I had never heard before. You hear all the things about his accomplishments during the war and the things he did after he came back, and like you said, all the decorations and everything else. But I had never heard that part of his life prior to this.
Oh, yeah. He came back foobar from all the combat that he had seen. Such as an example of this would be he was known to like either burst into tears or flee the room, or start throwing up when they would show newsreel footage of German widows.
Hmm.
You imagine where that took him? Oh my God. Of constant reminders of what he did over there, that he said he spent the rest of his life trying to forget about it. But, you know, the Hollywood machine wouldn't let him forget about it. Um, People who didn't understand wouldn't let him forget about it. And he suffered from this the rest of his life. He did not suicide, by the way. He died in a plane crash in 1971, if I recall correctly. But he would have been a fiery advocate had he lived.
Hmm. Yeah, that's amazing.
Oh, and as far as the Vietnam guys go, I will tell you one thing, and just a brief anecdote. When I do the whole PTSD thing and the talk, and the Vietnam guys are present, by now, like 5 or 6 of them have come up to me afterward, and they look at me, Doc. They say, "Jesus Christ, Doc, where the hell have you been? Where the hell were you when I got back?" And I give them the same smart ass answer every time. Listen, I was 12 when it ended, but I got here as fast as I could. True story.
And that is probably a good place to start looking at wrapping things up. We're coming up on the 1 hour mark here. Is there anything that we have not covered that either one of you want to make sure you get out to anyone who's listening?
Yes, actually, one more thing. Sorry, Nate, but while I'm thinking about it, I would like to make a plug for a not only two docs and a grunt, but Howard, if you could find the website, that would be great. A veterans organization that Nate, Luis, and I are part of, and it's called the 40 and 8.
The 40 and 8.
The 40 and 8. It's a veterans organization, unfortunately, a lot of people have not heard of. It's been around since 1920. It was part of American Legion from 1920 until they broke away in 1960 and became a freestanding unit. Now, and they're not bound by congressional charter. It's by invitation only. Now, um, somebody, an anonymous, well, Vietnam Army captain saw me do the old vet PTSD talk, and he asked me if I'd ever heard of the organization, and I said, I think I have. And he said, did you serve? And I said, yeah, not especially a long time. And he said, do you have an honorable discharge? I said, well, that I've got. And he says, okay, this is by invitation only, and I'm inviting you because of what you just did for the men in this room, and most of them were in tears. Um, Getting them to feel something and getting them, the conversation going. I'm inviting you. And I said, okay. I thought, no way in hell. But there were no votes on my application. And I was only in the organization for 9 months, and they appointed me to a national officer's position. And the 40 and 8 has cut me loose uh, doing PTSD advocacy. Now, the significance of this is there are all the mainstream organizations out there, Legion, AMVETS, and the ones we've all heard of. When membership was open to those organizations a number of years ago, I sent out email after email, phone call after phone call. This is who I am. This is what I do. I've been doing this for X number of years now. I hold 2 doctoral degrees in this discipline. I'm board certified twice, et cetera, et cetera. Crickets. None of them, I didn't receive a return email or call back until I got to the 40 and 8. The 40 and 8 operates to help veterans in the trenches. We do not just wear the funny hats and have our pictures taken with the politicians. We have dirt under our fingernails working at the VA hospitals, working find veterans in need in our communities, down in the trenches where we really should be. And I cannot recommend that organization highly enough to anybody who's listening. Uh, Hopefully, Howard, if you can find the website and put it on screen, or when you upload this to your channel, put a link to the website, and find out about somebody who might be a member in your area who can invite you along, and you will be part of not especially the largest, but the strongest veterans organization that I've seen out there that's down in the trenches, working with the common folk.
Let me try this once. See if I have this right.
I'll text it to
Is it
I That's looking pretty good. Hang on. I'm often on that website and I'll text it to you. Hang on. And I'm getting it right here. And by the way, while
Say
I'm
without
waiting,
the
the
space.
40 and huh? Yeah.
I'd say without the space though
the
in the URL.
okay, let me look here.
Well, you guys are doing that. I'd say for people that are thinking they'd like to tell somebody, it might be a good idea for them to talk, or if somebody's noticing, whether you're a family member or a friend, that somebody else is kind of silently suffering. I'd just recommend to people just tread lightly. And one of the most important things is to, tell them that you're sorry that they went through whatever they had to go through, and it must have been hard. And that lets them see that somebody sees them more than just thank you for your service and passing. They realize that you're seeing deeper into what they're dealing with, and I think that'll doing that alone, no matter what kind of trauma it is, I think is helpful to people and to help
Howard,
them realize they need to start talking.
I found the website and I texted it to you.
Yeah, I'm getting it up right now.
So yeah, you can put
If
that
I
on
can
the screen
spell.
for this evening and on the upload afterward. That'd be great.
Let's see. You know, I slept my way through high school typing, and I wish I had paid more attention.
Let me introduce you to Mr. Hunt and Mr. Peck.
There, does that look
Yeah, that's
better?
about it. 40 and 8. Yeah,
Okay.
that's about it.
All right.
So anybody listening, check out the 40 and 8. Find out somebody you know or who can get you in, and please join us. We need all the help we can get.
All right.
And
And I'm sorry, go ahead, Nate.
a quick comment that I saw something in the chat. Somebody mentioned when there are problems that people are having with the VA, it's almost always not the practitioners or the people providing the healthcare. It's almost always the bureaucracy that's imposed on top of them by the other portion of the VA. You'll even hear people who go to a VA that's considered a bad VA. They love the people that are taking care of them there. It's usually the red tape that causes a problem. So because I didn't want people to think that all VAs are bad and they shouldn't go. Check into one if that's the only way that you're going to be able to reach somebody for some help.
All right. If both of you would go ahead and hang out here for a minute, I'm going to move you out of the room, but don't go away.
Sure thing.
I'm just going to wrap up the show, and then I will be right back. So stand by for a moment here.
All right. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Thank you both for coming. All right, everyone, that's going to do it for the show this evening. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you for your participation. This will be available if you want to rewatch any portion of it, if you didn't catch something the first time through, and obviously be willing to share this with anyone you think that might be able to benefit from any of the things we talked about this evening. Real quick, the announcements that I made at the top of the show. Tomorrow's premiere video, 8 o'clock a.m. Eastern Standard Time. There will be a premiere live chat, just like always. Hope you can be there for that. And next Monday on Veterans Day, I will be at Hop Armament in Hayesville, Ohio. If you go to hopmunitions.com, you can find the address there. And anyone who's in the area and wants to stop by, I'd be glad to see you. I'm going to have some firearms there you've seen in the videos over the last few months. And I can't wait to see some of you and shoot the breeze. So definitely, if you can make it, stop by Hop Munitions, or Hop Armament rather, next Monday in Hayesville, Ohio, and I'll be there from 10 o'clock in the morning until 2 o'clock in the afternoon. That's going to do it for the show this evening. Thanks again for everyone who joined. See you next time, everyone. And until then, good shooting and bye-bye for now.